Today's text describing Jesus' initial miracle in John's gospel has been a problematic text for the church throughout the ages. For the more conservative religious types, the notion of Mary leaning on Jesus to produce the water into wine miracle is offensive, as Jesus was the Son of God before he was Mary's child. For the teetotaler types, Jesus providing wine, the devil's brew, for an entire village rather than launching a temperance rally, well, it's just unchristian. And for the hyper-spiritual types, the notion that Jesus' first miracle was the provision of liquid spirits rather than the empowerment of the Holy Spirit causes them to just be confirmed that, okay, this text is a throwaway text that got entrapped in its context and it means nothing to us today. In my opinion, today's text is problematic not for any of these reasons, but because it awakens us to a fundamental aspect of God's nature, an aspect that challenges more than our views on alcohol. It challenges us to reclaim a core component of our identity as God's children. Sadly, for too long, today's text has been viewed as a miracle story, a divinity of Jesus story, a Mary story, a tutorial on avoiding embarrassing results of poor wedding planning story, an awakening to the limits of religious ritual story, or a culturally entrapped story that has little application for 21st century discipleship. But what if? What if this interesting story really is about something far more fundamental to our life as children of God? What if the message of this rather humorous text and scene is about a core component of God's nature? As is our tradition here, we're going to read the text today. It's John chapter 2, verses 2 through 11. Verses 1 through 11, excuse me. And as you know, we're going to have you stand up just because, you've been sitting now for a while and got to work some of that churro off. And by the way, I just know, this is a short sermon because when I discovered we had churros, I know you guys are going to be out in about 12 minutes. So, we'll try to keep this short. Let's read together. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone jars, water jars, of the Jewish rite of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw out some and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
You may be seated. This is another one of those passages that I really think Monty Python missed that could have done some just great work with this thing. Because this is just too, I don't know why preachers don't preach this all the time. There's just a whole bunch of stuff here. Well, let's look at the text. So out of the blue, we are looking over the shoulders of Mary and Jesus and his disciples who have been invited to a wedding celebration in the tiny village of Cana, which is 9 miles north of Nazareth. Now, you know exactly where that is, right? So you got that picture in your mind? Okay. Immediately, we are told then, once we've situated ourselves in that scene, the wine gave out. Now, any Presbyterian knows that's the end of the party, that there's no reason to hang around. So, yeah, that's a significant thing. At which time, Mary who John always calls the mother of Jesus, not Mary, with what I believe to be a raise of the eyebrows or a wink, says to Jesus, they have no wine. She knows her son. She's got this whole picture going on here. And she's kind of winking at Jesus going, what do you think? Got anything? Well, Jesus' response is less than gracious, declaring that his mother need not concern herself with the wedding couple's embarrassment, nor drag him into it, because his time had not come yet. And when his time does come, it was going to be far more important than simply adding some more booze to a little village called Cana. But as a consequence of Mary's personal experience with God's inbreaking, she instructs the servants, do whatever he tells you, hinting that they are about to encounter a mind-boggling event, an inbreaking of God's abundance in this tiny village. Think about it. Think about those servants, that servant who took the scoop of water wine to the steward and kind of going, whoa, what happened? And to have the smirk on his face when the steward goes, this is the best stuff I've ever had. And the servant's kind of going, wow, yeah. Now the rest of the scene is filled with the consequence of Jesus' decision to remedy the wedding couple's gross miscalculations by supplying them, based on the math, between 120 and 180 gallons of premium wine, which not only shocked the wine steward, but it also awakened Jesus' disciples to his divinity, to his divine nature. Now, the message, in my estimation, in this rather humorous story, I believe goes much deeper than Jesus revealing his divine nature. Rather, it reveals God's abundance flowing through Jesus' actions. You see, if the story was about revealing Jesus' miraculous powers, this could have been accomplished with a single serving of wine. The fact that Jesus overwhelms the party with multiple gallons of good wine, I'm talking Bethel Heights, you know what I'm saying? Good stuff, suggests another message. Something else is being proclaimed here, if we have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. Could Jesus be offering a glimpse of God's longing for all of God's people? A life of abundance linked to faith in their God rather than a life of scarcity driven by Rome's imperial, fear-driven culture? Might the message of this quaint little story be an invitation to all of God's children to experience a reawakening to the abundant nature of their God? A God of loving provision and presence and promise. A God who overwhelms and blesses and enriches those who choose faith over fear. With that said, what's the meaning of this message of God's abundance in our own culture of scarcity? What would celebrating God's abundance look like for us today? What's the connection between this story and our 150 years of generosity stewardship emphasis that we're entering into? Well, the initial step in celebrating God's abundance, in my estimation, is to recognize that abundance is, in fact, a core aspect of God's nature, which means God's gracious generosity to you and me is not something God does. Rather, it's something or part of who God is. God is simply imparting God's own self to us, not manipulating some stuff that means nothing to him and something to us. This is a giving of himself. This is why Mary tells the servants to follow Jesus' instructions. You see, because she had experienced with her own life God's abundant nature. Remember her Magnificat, Luke 1:46 through 55, when this little Palestinian Jewish gal, probably 13, 14 years old, encounters the angel that says to her, you're about to give birth to the Son of God. I mean, that's a little bit bigger picture than what Mary thought she was going to be doing. I mean, she thought her and Joseph and a couple of kids in Nazareth and, that'd be good. But God said, no, I've got something completely bigger, completely different, completely more empowering than just that. You see, Mary had experienced God's blessings throughout her life because of that first encounter, which gave her the confidence that Jesus' response to the scarcity of this wedding feast was about to be overwhelmed by the same God of abundance that had overwhelmed her life. I love the way Henry Nouwen puts it when he says, God is a God of abundance, not a God of scarcity. Jesus reveals to us God's abundance when he offers so much bread to the people that there are 12 large baskets of leftover scraps. And when he makes his disciples catch so many fish that their boat nearly sinks. God does not give us just enough. God gives us more than enough. More bread and fish than we can eat. More love than we can dare ask for. And in our scene, more wine than any village ought to have. Do you get it? Do you hear it? It's difficult to hear because we have been trained in a scarcity mentality that's about hoarding and saving and scrimping and scraping and making sure that we take care of ourselves. And God says, can you open up your hands or can you fill those stinking water jugs with some water and watch what I do? Now, another aspect, in my estimation, of God's abundance that we discover in this passage is the setting of this initial miracle. This is John's first miracle, first sign or wonder. And it's in Cana, which is the ultimate marginal village that no other gospel even mentions. A nowhere place that Jesus touches with God's abundance. This place never gets it into the biblical narrative unless this scene happens. It's not even on the map. You see, in a culture of scarcity, there was nothing about Cana or the nameless couple whose wedding feast was about to blow up that merited Jesus' investment. Because you see, in a scarcity culture, scarcity is about ignoring the margins. It's about focusing on yourself and those you care about or those who merit some attention. It's not about giving it to everybody. Oh my God, there's not enough for all of us. But in the face of all that, could John's story of Jesus' change of heart remind us and his original audience that God's abundance is the result of God's nature rather than our worthiness? Could it be that we don't merit this stuff? We don't earn this stuff? That God gives it to us out of God's grace and love? Richard Rohr offers insight that I think helps us understand why this concept is so hard for us to grasp. He says, the ego does not know how to receive things freely or without logic. It prefers a worldview of scarcity, or at least quid pro quo, where only the clever win. It likes to be worthy and needs to understand in order to be able to accept things. That problem and its overcoming is at the very center of the gospel plot line. And it has always been overcome from God's side. The only problem is getting us in on the process. You see, the amazing and challenging aspect of God's abundance, in my estimation, for we who have been nurtured in a culture of scarcity, is that it's absolutely unmerited and rooted only in God's eternal nature, not our cleverness, not our wittiness, not our worthiness. Now, once we've claimed or reclaimed God's abundant nature, then I think we're invited to embody that nature in the way we manage our lives and the way we extend that abundance to others. You see, if abundance is a core aspect of God's nature, then it seems to me to follow that it should be a core aspect of the life of God's children, right? I mean, especially in our own culture of scarcity. that's one of the things that sets us apart from the culture around us. Now, friends, scarcity seldom creates or generates or enhances our world. That's a message the myth of scarcity never tells us, but it is true. It never creates or generates or enhances our world. Rather, it is the God-granted spirit of abundance that changes lives and circumstances. When you look at the scene, Jesus' comment to Mary's kind of wink and a nod about they're out of wine is basically a scarcity statement. This ain't my time, woman. And if it is going to be my time, it's not going to be about this. I got bigger fish to fry, or bigger vats of wine to make. I don't know what the analogy is, but just saying, no, that's a classic scarcity line. But somehow Mary knew that God's abundance was going to work its work in his life and bring about something different. If Jesus and Mary's dialogue ends at that point, where Jesus says, it's not my time, life's too scarce, the miracle doesn't happen. And we don't know about Cana because there's no reason to have this story. It is the fact that God's abundance overwhelms even the Son of God's fear for the moment and empowers him to do something pretty wonderful. I wonder if John's story of Jesus' struggle with scarcity is intended to help us understand just how easily we can lose our connection to God's nature. I wonder if it's a sacred reminder of how easily we can unintentionally inhibit God's generative and transformative abundance in our sphere of influence, not even knowing it. Friends, as we venture into our annual stewardship emphasis, 150 years of generosity, I pray we pause to claim or to reclaim our role as agents of God's abundance. That we reflect on the places and the times in our lives when God's abundance washed over us, bringing vitality, new beginnings, hope, and promises beyond our wildest dreams. And we've all had those moments. But isn't it interesting how the surrounding culture causes us to not focus there, but focus on what we don't have? In a culture of scarcity, celebrating God's abundance may be in the ultimate act of discipleship. It may be the ultimate act of commitment that empowers us to embody faith rather than fear. Now, make no mistake, celebrating God's abundance does not begin with an estimate of giving card. Rather, it begins with a reoccurring decision to allow God's abundance to flow through you. A reoccurring decision to rise above the inherent limitations of scarcity so that we might experience God's longing as a community of faith here in the corner of Winter and Chemeketa streets. As we come to a conclusion with our vision for the future, as you have received the vision report and the session is now beginning to massage that and put together a plan, an action plan for the next 5 years, while we don't know all of the aspects of what the future holds, we do know this. We do know this with assurance and certainty. Scarcity is not God's plan for the future of our church. It just isn't. And any who claim it is, we need to hug them and drag them along with us. Because God's got another plan. It looks a lot like water turning into wine. Gallons of it. Not shot glasses. Parker Palmer tells about a flight he was on that he experienced a situation of the generative power of God's abundance that really has carried over into his life in many ways. He tells the story of the time he was a passenger on a plane that pulled away from the gate, taxied to the remote corner of the airfield to the tarmac, and then stopped. And if you've been on a flight and that's happened, you know what that means. You know, it ain't good. Well, the pilot comes on the intercom and says, I have some bad news, and I have some really bad news. The bad news is there's a storm front in the west. Denver is socked in, and it's shut down. We've looked at alternatives, and there are none. So we're going to be staying here for a while, a few hours. That's the bad news. The really bad news is that we have no food, and it's lunchtime. Well, at this, everybody began to groan. Some passengers started to complain, and some became angry. I mean, can you imagine that in our culture today? It's just amazing. But then, Palmer said, one of the flight attendants did something that was amazing. She stood up, grabbed the intercom mic, and she said, we're really sorry, folks. We didn't plan for this to happen this way, and we really can't do much about it. And I know for some of you, this is a big deal. Some of you are really hungry because you were looking forward to a nice lunch. You can tell this was a long time ago in flights. 2 bags of peanuts. Some of you may be on a medical condition and really need lunch. Some of you may not care one way or another, and as I saw some of you come on, there's a bunch of us that could probably do without a couple of lunches. So I'll tell you what we're going to do. I have a couple of bread baskets up here, and I'm going to pass them around, and I'm asking everyone to put something in the basket, something you brought, a little snack or something along the way, some peanut butter crackers or candy bar, you name it, whatever you have. And some of you have a few lifesavers or some chewing gum or some Rolaids. And if you don't have anything edible, you have a picture of your children or spouse or girlfriend or boyfriend or a bookmark or a business card. Everyone put something in, and then we will reverse the process. We'll pass the baskets around again, and everyone can take out what he or she needs. Well, Palmer said, what happened next was absolutely amazing. The griping stopped immediately. People started to root around in their pockets and their handbags, and some of them got up and opened up their suitcases stored in the overhead luggage racks and got out boxes of candy and salami, even a bottle of wine. Again, I don't know how that happened, but nonetheless. People were laughing and talking. This flight attendant had transformed a group of people who were focused on need and deprivation into a community of sharing and celebration. She had transformed scarcity into a different kind of abundance. And after the flight, as Palmer was leaving, he stopped on his way at the front door where the flight attendant was, and he said to her, do you know there's a story in the Bible about what you did back there? About Jesus feeding a lot of people with very little food? The flight attendant smiled and winked and said, yeah, I've read the story. That's why I did it. Isn't it amazing when we actually embody the gospel, what happens? It's as if we're trying to protect ourselves or the world or something else from this abundant God who just says, trust me. For crying out loud, trust me. And see what I'll do. Friends, celebrating God's abundance opens us to experience God's extravagant desire of human flourishing. To view our lives and the life of our community of faith as conduits of God's generative power to fulfill needs. It opens us to the creative presence of the Jesus who transforms ceremonial water jars into fountains of celebration. Sisters and brothers, stewardship is about so much more than giving money to a budget. Rather, it is about adopting a lifestyle that aligns you with an abundant God. A God who longs for you to use you as a means of abundance to flow through you, creating in you the ability to be an agent of hope and love and life. Salem First Presbyterian Church has a wonderful legacy of 150 years of generosity. A legacy that has brought us to this time and this place. As we contemplate our future, let us choose to embrace that future with the spirit of abundance. Let us choose to be God's agents of new beginning, new possibilities, of new life. Let us choose to carry God's abundance into the city we love. And let us be known as a people who open our hearts and our lives to a God who just does some absurdly crazy things to bring life. Let us pray.